Great, thanks for coming. Hope you all are enjoying the conference. I know I am. We're going to talk about how I think we can be effective remote developers. So as mentioned, I was one of the first developers at Stitch Fix, so I've been there over 4 years. And during that time, worked with a wide variety of people. Of course, developers, right? But a lot more than that, right? Business people, people running Stitch Fix, users, people using the software that we're building, vendors, all of that. So all remote, right? Day one, me and developers number 1 and 2 decided we were going to make remote work because I was not going to move to San Francisco, and so we did. And now 4 years later, we've got over 80, maybe close to 90 developers now. And most of the work is done remotely, right? So over half of the development team doesn't live in the Bay Area where the company is headquartered. Those that do live in the Bay Area, yes, they come to the office. They don't come every single day. So a lot of our engineering work is done remotely. And so hopefully we can take some tips about that. But what do we mean remote? I was thinking about this. Like there's actually a lot of configurations of work that technically qualify as remote and to which everything in this talk should apply. So I tried to come up with a pithy description. This is not the greatest English sentence ever written, but I think it kind of captures it, right? You're remote if you do not often interact face-to-face with the people that you work with. Right? So you go somewhere to do work. Maybe that is your office. Maybe that is a coffee shop. Maybe that is some co-working space. And you work with people at your job, and those people are not there most of the time. So that means you're doing remote work. So there's a lot of ways that this sort of works, right? There's the lone wolf, which is super hard mode, right? You're all by yourself, and everyone else you work with is at some office, and you have to deal with that. That's hard. Easy mode is everyone is distributed, so no one goes to an office. Everyone is having the same kind of experience. But multiple offices is a form of remote work, right? Like if you get up and have a commute and go to an office in New York every day, but the people you work with are in some office in San Francisco, well, you're a remote worker because they're not there with you. So you have the same challenges that the fully distributed and the lone wolf have. So talked about effective in the title too. What does that mean? So obviously you need to produce value, right? You're hired to do a thing, and you need to get that thing done. But it's and I guess also you want to work on a thing that is valuable, right? You don't want to just come in and do like pointless work. So you want that to be happening. You also want to have agency, right? You don't want your job to just be closing JIRA tickets all day. You want to have some sort of control over what you're doing, how you're working, how you interact with people, or you have some sort of effect beyond just the JIRA tickets that you're closing every day. And you want to feel included, right? You want to feel like you're part of the team, all working collectively to get something done together. You're not just that dude off in Alabama who we email stuff to, right? Like you want to feel like you're part of the team. And, right, you want the experience to be rewarding. I mean, at least as rewarding as having to have a job can be. Now, I don't want to imply that you just get these for free by everyone showing up to an office. Like, of course not. But you get little bits of that stuff, right? Think about inclusion, right? If you're all sitting in the same room, you're kind of by default included on the team because you're all there. So when you're remote, all of those things are harder to achieve, and you have to be pretty intentional about how to make that happen. And that's what we'll talk about. The stuff that we'll hear is not, right, they're not easy things to do, right? This isn't a thing where you just install Slack and everybody's good. You have to constantly upkeep your remote experience. Not a week goes by that I don't spend some time thinking about, like, what am I doing for my remote experience or the people that I work with? What have I done to, like, harm or help that, right? Like, it's a constant thing that you have to do, which sounds like a lot of work, but, of course, it's worth it. Those of you who raise your hand as remote developers certainly know, right? You get a freedom and flexibility that you don't get by having to go to an office. Right? So like, I don't have a commute. That's nice. I can make lunch in my kitchen. And in fact, my kitchen is stocked with the snacks that only I like. I don't have to use a public bathroom. My favorite part, though, about working remote is I don't have to live in San Francisco, right? It's great. I love not living in San Francisco. But the company gets a benefit out of it too, right? So they get access to a wider pool of talent. So if Stitch Fix had decided the only way to build this team is everybody has to come to some office in San Francisco, and that's just how it is, then by definition, right, we have access to fewer people. When I was preparing this talk, I discovered an interesting fact that there are lots of really amazing developers who don't live in Silicon Valley. It's crazy, but it's true. And so Stitch Fix has access to all of them across the country, maybe even the world. And so that just makes it easier for us to build the team that we want. And that could have had a real impact on the company's success, right? If you think about a functioning company, right, there's always more work to do than there are engineers, right? Because the opposite of that would be weird. So that means that the stuff your company can produce is kind of limited by the size and makeup of your engineering team. And so if you're restricting who can be on that team to just some location, then you're slowing down your ability to deliver things, right? And that can have real consequences. So we avoided that by making remote work. But it's not just the company's responsibility, it's our responsibility too. And this is how we do that, right? I'm not going to talk about chatbots. We're going to talk about building and maintaining trust with the people that you work with. Like, this is the only way to make it work, and you have to be intentional about it. You have to adopt some mindsets that we'll talk about, and those will drive behaviors that will build trust with people that you don't know and maintain trust with people that you do know. And all of that sort of makes you work better, right? If you're trusted and you trust the people that you work with, then you're going to be working on important things because you trust them. You will trust that they will include you. You will, if you're trusted, then you are allowed to have agency beyond just those JIRA tickets that you're closing, right? And it's much more rewarding to work somewhere where you trust and are trusted. So that's what we'll kind of talk about. Has anyone heard this phrase, the half-life of trust is 6 weeks? I'd heard it before, and I didn't know where it came from, and I found it on this link, and I'm sorry, it said, well, it's not that tiny, but you're never going to copy that down. You can click on it when you get the slides. But it's an article by Steve McConnell, who is a noted author of software books, such as Code Complete. And in the article, he's talking about his frustrations with, as you can see the title, offshore development. So he's in the United States, his team is in India, so it's like super hard remote because there's no time overlap, other side of the world. And so they're talking about like trust, right? That not only is that a key to making it work and trusting that team and the team trusting him, but that it has to be replenished, right? The half-life is a good way to think about it, right? If you like work with someone, you build up a lot of trust, and then like that's it, and then you don't see them for a while, you don't interact with them, then that trust is going to start to go away. Not going to disappear, but it's going to go away. So you have to actively replenish it. Seeing people in person helps replenish it, right? But all the time in between seeing people in person, you have to do other things to kind of keep it up, and that's what we'll talk about. So I mentioned these mindsets. So there's, I think, 4 mindsets that if you adopt them, they will drive behaviors that will then help you build and maintain trust. And we'll talk about some of those behaviors, but if you think about them, there's going to be lots and lots of things to do. So communicate frequently and clearly. Be responsive, but set boundaries. Assume good intentions. And help others help you. So we're going to talk about these things in the context of various activities and ways that we work. So we'll talk about it with coding, communication, socializing, things like that. But we do need to talk about technology a little bit. This is the least interesting, it's the easiest, but it does have to happen. You have to have some way to communicate with people, and that means that you have to have a piece of technology. If you're all in an office, you don't technically need technology because you can go find the person you want to talk to and talk to them. When you are not with that person, then you need something, right? Years ago, it was the telephone. Now we have better tools, and you're going to need them. And everyone has to agree to use them. So you need a chat system that is easy to use, and that includes people who are not developers. Like, everyone you work with has to be willing and able to go into whatever that chat system is. So I'm sorry, IRC is not it. Regular people cannot use that. But you know, Slack, HipChat, whatever, they all work fine. And so that's good for asynchronous communication, but you're going to need to be able to talk to people kind of real time, right? So you're going to need some sort of video conferencing system that can support multiple people talking at one time and that allows you to share your screen. Anyone like using WebEx? Anyone love WebEx? Hey, all right, nice. I hate WebEx, but it meets the standard, right? So that means that the bar is low. You just need something. Google Hangouts works great. We use a thing called Blue Jeans. They all have an equal level of terribleness, but they all do work, and you need this, right? And so what's interesting about this, and we'll talk about it more later, but a video conference is the way that most people will experience you as a person, you know, over a screen, over the terrible internet. And as we know, everything between you and someone else goes over the internet through terrible infrastructure, awful software. None of it like really technically works, and you have no control over that. But you do control what goes into it, right? Which is your microphone. And your laptop microphone is shitty. I'm sorry to tell you, but it's terrible, and you don't want people to experience your voice through your crappy laptop mic. So you need a better microphone. Apple earbuds are perfectly acceptable, right? They totally work fine. So again, the bar is not high. Okay, technology over, back to the harder part, which is building and maintaining trust. So I talked about like the activities that we do as developers. So I want to talk about each of these 4 things, and then we'll talk about how the mindsets apply to these 4 things and drive the behaviors when you're doing these things, right? Coding, asynchronous communication like emails or documents, synchronous communication like the aforementioned video chat, and socializing. So coding, that's the thing that we do as developers. That's what we're hired to do. Hopefully we're spending most of our time doing that. And code is our work product. Right? It is the thing that we are producing. It is the artifact by which most people will judge us as employees, coworkers, whatever you have it, because that's what we're doing all day. So how do we communicate frequently and clearly when we're coding? So you've all been in an office with programmers before, I'm assuming. Like, what does that look like? Okay? Everyone's typing on a keyboard into some like black rectangle, and like they look like they're programming, right? I mean, maybe they're not, but it kind of looks like they're programming. I'm typing away, so it must be programming. So even as silly as that sounds, that's like something. Like it looks like someone's doing something. When you're remote, you get none of that, right? No one knows that you're doing anything because you're just not there. They can't observe, what's going on with your black rectangle and your keyboard. So you need to find a way to make big projects into lots of smaller ones so that you can get your work in front of people and produce a kind of cadence of productivity, of shipping, things like that. This is surprisingly hard. Many great developers do the opposite. They take small projects and make them into big ones. So you've got to fight hard to do it another way. And what this does, especially if you're new on a team, is it lets people like understand what you're working on and get feedback on smaller things which are easier to understand. It also demonstrates that you are motivated by getting a thing done, having a result, shipping, and people who kind of drive to a result are trusted more than people who aimlessly never ship things. And on that note, right, when you're making changes, like always and aggressively think about what is the smallest viable change I can make. I mean, you go into some code base to make a change, and there's some terrible class that needs to be refactored, or the white space isn't to your taste, or maybe the tests are written in a wrong way. Like, don't change any of that. Don't just fix lots of extra stuff that has nothing to do with the problem that you're solving. I might say fix it later, but probably you should never fix it later anyway. Just like focus on the problem at hand, right? And so smallest viable change, and the viable, right, is important, right? You're not just like dumping a bunch of shit into the code base. Like it's got to be good and to the standards that you hold yourself to and all that. But what is the smallest thing that gets the job done? And the advantage of this is that a small change is easy to understand. And so when you're writing code, presumably there's some process by which somebody has to say, yes, that can go to production. Whatever that is, that person or people have to understand what you've done. And so by having the change be small and compact and easy to understand, that's more likely to happen. It also, again, stresses that you're driving to results, that you're not getting lost in some like aimless refactoring that you don't really need to do right now, and that you want to get things done. And it's just easier to get feedback. Along those lines, right, you're going to probably write some sort of text to go along with your change. Maybe that's just a commit message, or maybe that's like a pull request. You're going to do something to say, why am I writing this code at all? And write it better than maybe you think, because this might be the only thing people know about to like judge what your change is. They can't go over to your desk and be like, I didn't understand that. What's going on? They might not even know that they don't understand what you're doing because you haven't set any context. So write a better change request. What I try to do every time is we use GitHub, so we make pull requests, and so I will type problem, hit return, and I will type what problem am I trying to solve briefly. Hit return, type solution, hit return. Outline very briefly what my solution is or why I did it the way I did. Like, a small change, small pull request. Large change, large pull request, right? More tactically, learning how to screencast and diagram, and like so much that it's just as easy to do that as it is to write, is hugely powerful. So early at Stitch Fix, I was building software for people who work in a warehouse, so like there's no way I'm gonna like be with them because like A, the warehouse is not in DC where I live. B, if I were in San Francisco, it's also not in San Francisco. So I had to work with them remotely when I'm building software for them. And I would write these very long emails that were like, here's how it works, and here's a screenshot, and here's arrows, and it was just a lot, and no engagement. Right? I mean, I hear nothing. Like I can't have nailed it, right? There's no way that that was perfect. So I started making screencasts using this thing called Jing. It's free to make a 5-minute or less screencast. You can share it privately online. And I would just use the app in my development environment and talk over and explain what was going on. tons of engagement, right? Lots of feedback, positive and negative, helped me do better at my job because I could demonstrate what I was doing without having to sort of assault somebody with a wall of text. And after a while, right, you get good at that, and then it's just another tool in your toolbox, right? It's just as simple as typing. So commit to doing that. Diagramming, same deal. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. Okay, be responsive, but set boundaries. So not really about coding, but the first and most important boundary are your working hours, especially if you have multiple time zones, right? Anybody like doing time zone math, right? If you work with someone in Arizona or that weird county in Indiana, like, it's really difficult. And regular people aren't going to do it at all. So just tell them, right, I work East Coast hours or whatever it is. So I put that in my email signature. And then, you know, people are not going to necessarily know, and so they might schedule a meeting with you that's like 8 o'clock. You just be cool. Hey, that's a little after my working hours. Can we schedule that later? Or however it is. People want to know, but they don't have a way to figure it out, so just tell them, right? Setting boundaries. Now, in terms of being responsive, right, we talked before about you're writing code, making a pull request. You're essentially asking someone to say, yep, that looks good. So probably, right, every pull request you write is probably not 100% perfect, so you're going to have some feedback, and you want that feedback. And so when you make a change that is asking for feedback, your job then becomes to respond to that feedback, right? Your job is not to go off and do the next thing. It is to, like, figure out what you need to do to get that thing shipped and engage with anyone who's responding, right? So that does a couple of things. One, it lets people get to know you, how you work, how you think. You can go back and forth. It demonstrates that you're sort of driving to shipping things. Two, it capitalizes on the context that someone has built up by looking at your code if you're quick to respond, right? They've figured out what you're trying to do, and they've got some feedback. And if you don't respond for like a day, then they've forgotten all that stuff, and then you got to start all over again. So being quick means you can capitalize on that, and that right, it doesn't waste their time, so that is nice. And people who don't waste others' time are trusted. So. And so what I've learned is, this is a very long bullet, you have to develop a workflow that is not like hours and hours of disconnected from the world while I'm coding. And I know that sucks to hear, and that is hard to do because we like to get into our flow. But the world is happening around you, and no one can see you, and no one knows what you're doing while you're in that flow, and you could miss things that are important times for you to engage on something. So the way I like to think about it, and I can tell you my whole crazy scheme after this if you want to know, but I have in my mind SLAs for all types of communication, right? Service level agreements. So for example, if someone private messages me in Slack, I will read that within 5 minutes. I won't respond, but I will read it, or at least see if I need to read it, right? Several times an hour, I will look at my inbox. I will not read emails, but I will look at the subjects, quickly scanning for anything that's important, that is more important than the code that I'm writing or whatever I'm happen to be working on. Because that exists. There are things like that. And so, you just kind of get into a habit and then organize your work in a way that lets you kind of leave your context and come back to it. I can tell you all about that later. But you have to figure out whatever works for you, right? Don't be hours and hours offline, because then you will not be responsive. Assume good intentions, right? Anyone enjoy having their code reviewed or thinking about the first time you had your code reviewed, how pleasant that was? We are not a culture and a profession of critique at all. If any of you have worked with architects or designers, you know that they very much are. And what that means is that they're good at critiquing, and we are not good at critiquing. And a bad critique is one that hurts and feels bad, and you're like, why are you saying that? And it's my work product, how can you talk about it, right? It's very hard. And so maybe someday engineering, programming will be good at critiquing, but until then, you have to assume that the person who's telling you things about your code is just trying to help, even if they're not like doing it in a nice way. Right? Because they want to make it better. Like if they didn't care, they wouldn't bother commenting at all. And it's hard, but it's the only way forward, right? When there's critique, you have to assume everyone's trying to help you, and that's just the only way to make any sense of it. Now, leading to the next thing, helping others help you. What I've also found is that people who are terrible at critiquing your code by typing text are often good at doing it another way. So if you can figure out what everyone's kind of best mode of communication is, go to them there, right? So there's a developer on my team just doesn't engage on pull requests, or when he does, it's like it's not good. But if I talk to him for 5 minutes, I can save myself hours of maddening back and forth, and it's very pleasant. So you build up an index of everyone on your team and what is their deal, and then go to them, and then that makes everything much smoother. Also being specific about what you want, what kind of feedback you want. So putting up a pull request and be like, here you go, that's not very helpful. Like, you could be more helpful. So saying, like, here's what I want to look at. And this does a couple of things, right? Thing number one that's kind of obvious is it lets people focus on what to look at, lets them kind of more quickly get up to speed and engage with you and all of that stuff. But the other thing, too, is it's a chance to show some vulnerability in a very safe way, right? Hey, I wrote this class. It's very complicated. I couldn't think of a way to make it better. This is the best I could come up with. Anyone have any ideas, right? And like, it's very easy to say that because code is more objective than other things. And then when you show that kind of self-awareness and vulnerability, people will trust what you say more because you're able to sort of be self-aware, right? And those people are trusted, and that means that people will come to you for honest feedback about things, and that increases your agency, right? Good knock-on effects. Okay, that's coding. So coding is a form of asynchronous communication. So this is talking about all the other forms of asynchronous communication, which is probably email, documents, project plans, anything where like you're working on a thing that is not code and you're not sitting in the same room or in a video chat. And what this also means is that this includes a lot more non-developers. And so that always makes things a little tricky because of everyone's different communication styles, which we'll talk about. So communicating frequently and clearly, providing more context. So when you're talking to somebody in real life, you can see their eyes glaze over. You can see them lose interest. They can interrupt you when you're being confusing and ask a question. When you're sending an email or a document, like, you get none of that. And you may never know if you were understood. You will never possibly know that, like, the thing you're trying to communicate, like, landed. So you want to increase the chance that that happens by providing a little bit more context. Like, what is the backstory of this email? Like, what is the problem I'm trying to solve? Or something to give someone a little bit better of a chance of, like, understanding it, because you're probably not going to get a lot of back and forth asking, like, what you mean. You will become a much better writer by being remote and following these rules. And here is the one bullet point of how to be a better writer. So you're writing something that you want someone to read, right? It's only fair that you read it yourself first. And then revise it, right? When you read what you've written, you will always find a mistake. Not spelling, not grammar, but maybe like going on too long or using the wrong word or something like that. And so if you do this one bullet point for everything that you write, you will be much better. And you will also feel more comfortable writing because you know that you have this revise step to fix whatever you've done. So like, if you read any book on writing, it's like, make a shitty first draft, right? Get it on the page. That's just get it out of your head, and then you can fix it, right? Everything I write, I read and revise. Typography is important. When I was younger, I used an email client called Mutt. It works in the terminal, and my opinions on how email should be formatted, it should be text, fixed width font. If you need any formatting, you can just hit return twice to make a paragraph, and that's all you need, right? Because I want to have everything in there. And that's, you know, bold means things. Underline means things. Bullet points convey meaning, and typography helps people understand the written word, and there's not that many things you need to apply. Put some bullet points in. You know, when you get an email from someone that's a wall of text with no capital letters and no paragraphs, like, you're not going to read that, and no one's going to read that when you produce that. So, you know, take a little time to Command B on some things that are important. And again, diagramming. So when you're communicating technical things, in particular, diagrams are super helpful. Diagramming tools are hard to use, though, but they are learnable. So if you have a Mac, OmniGraph will just go buy it and learn all the keyboard shortcuts. And when you do that, you can create a very nice-looking diagram very quickly. If you don't, I'm sure there's some equivalent for Windows and Linux. Another thing to learn is GraphViz, which is a programming language. It produces pictures. It is very cool, and if you can learn that, again, you're reducing the friction to using this different form of communication that is much more effective than thousands of words on the page. Okay, be responsive and set boundaries. A lot of this is very similar to the code that we talked about. Again, engaging and giving feedback. So some forms of communication, like with code, you're doing a thing and producing it. But often people are going to ask you or ask a group for an opinion or needing help, or they're going to need something from you. And so by engaging and giving them feedback and doing what's asked, right, you are more felt. Your presence is felt. You are felt as an included member of the team. And this is the way to have agency. This is the way to cultivate your own leadership, is if you have an opinion on a thing and you don't share that with anybody, it kind of doesn't matter, right? But if you share that opinion, especially things that you are know well or have strong feelings about, then you can affect your team by engaging and being responsive when things are discussed, right? If you check email once a day, who knows what conversation happened during that day that you could have and maybe should have contributed to, but you didn't because you weren't engaging, weren't being responsive. So this is hugely helpful for having your presence felt and being a kind of trusted resource to help other people. And don't forget affirming feedback, right? One of the other things about learning how to critique is that it's not all a bunch of complaints about how terrible a thing is. Yes, you want to find mistakes, you want to find things that are wrong, you want to make it better, but part of that is saying what's good. And it's not just cool or nice or good job or yeah. You have to be specific, right? So for example, hey, Chris, the API documentation you wrote for that new service, the parts of the URL, they map right to our business domain objects, so it makes it super easy to understand, right? That is very specific feedback that is affirming, and it's nice to hear, right? So if I'm a person who says things that others think is nice, that's good, right? But that's the surface level benefit. The deeper benefit is that you are demonstrating that you understand and demonstrating that that person has communicated well to you, and you're also kind of confirming a way to do things, right? You're saying, hey, I agree with you on this thing, and that's a way to have agency, right? Assume good intentions. So I mentioned the beginning of this little section about non-developers, and so I have been very frustrated in my career by being sent a PowerPoint presentation that should be in a document, or a spreadsheet that should be in a document, or interacting with people who use ask as a noun or solution as a verb, and it would used to drive me insane. I'd be like, well, they're clearly an idiot because they don't understand the English language or whatever. That's obviously not true. Everyone has their way of communicating that works best for them, and so the only way to deal with people who are not developers, or even for developers, is to assume everyone's really good at their job. Assume that they're working with you because they're good. And if you're not seeing that, it's something about the communication. It's not them, right? That's the only way to go forward. And then once you kind of adopt this sort of mindset, then it's a lot easier to work with everyone because you're not frustrated by the friction of different communication styles. You're just like, hey, they're awesome, and hopefully they think I'm awesome, so we can kind of work together and figure that out. It leads to better results. Helping others help you. So we mentioned this in the code section, also being specific in the feedback that you want. All the reasons stated there, but an additional reason is that it helps set context. When you say what you're trying to get at or what you actually want, specifically, that helps people understand where am I coming from, what is the problem you're trying to solve, and that can help them understand it, and of course, help you. This is a hard one, synchronous communication, the aforementioned video chat. And you really can't avoid this for lots of reasons. Some things are very hard to do in text. As mentioned, some people do not do well in text, but they do amazing in a video chat, and you need to kind of go where they are to be effective. And this is how you experience other people as a human when you're not physically present. And it's this weird uncanny valley of talking to a person, right? Because you're through this screen that is pixelated over a network that doesn't work, and things drop out, and it is very uncomfortable. And I hope that we have holographic telepresence someday, but until then, this is what we got, looking at each other on a screen. So, communicating frequently. Clarity is the important thing here. The first thing is to be prepared, right? I find that if I have to talk about a thing and I'm not prepared, I will just ramble on or say stupid things, or it's not good. If I'm prepared, then when I open my mouth, tends to be better things come out. And so being prepared is a couple of ways to do that, right? If there's things to read before your meeting, read those things. If you have an opinion on the subject of the meeting, formulate that opinion in your mind, specifically. Don't be like, oh yeah, I'm totally down with JSON. Think it through a little bit more, one level more about why you care about the subject, so that you're kind of ready to go and engage. When you're talking, this is super awkward, but you should use nouns instead of pronouns way more than you think, right? He, she, it, they, that, thing, those words don't mean anything. The only chance you have of knowing what it means is that someone said a noun before, and you probably think that it refers to that noun, right? And now when you think about a video chat system, the words that you say are not all going to come through. This is a fact. Things are going to drop out. People aren't going to hear you. A gust of wind could blow someone's microphone, and it mutes everybody else for that second. And the thing you said isn't going to be heard. I've been on a video chat where I was trying desperately with context clues to figure out what everyone was talking about. And after several minutes, I'm like, I'm sorry, what are we talking about? Because I missed the noun. So use them more. It makes it more clear and makes what is heard and does go over the wire more likely to be understood. A better way is to pause more frequently and ask for feedback, right? So you're making a point, and you really should kind of, like, when you're at the end of a point, make it quickly and then say, hey, does everybody, any questions? Does that make sense to everybody before I move on, right? You say, I've got more to say, but you give a pause, and everyone has a nice little safe area that they can ask a question without having to interrupt you. You can also use this time to call on particular people. So if you know that someone has an opinion or is knowledgeable about a thing, hey, Pat, I know you know about encoding JSON. What do you think, right? And that just makes it a lot easier for everyone to kind of weigh in a safe and easy way without having to interrupt, which unfortunately you will have to do sometimes. So being responsive and setting boundaries, right? That leads to this. So first, pay attention. I mean, it sounds ridiculous, but if you go into a meeting with people and you're like looking at your phone, I guess that's pretty rude, so you wouldn't do that. And so you kind of naturally will pay more attention in a meeting where you're all kind of together. But when you're on a video chat, you're on your phone or on your computer, and like you can convince yourself that you can multitask all day long because emails are popping up, Slack is telling you things, and like I'm pretty good at multitasking, and so this is terrible for me because I frequently will try to multitask and then I'm not paying attention, and then either best case is I just miss some information, worst case is I get called out on it, or I have to ask someone to repeat themselves because I wasn't paying attention. So yes, pay attention, don't multitask. The harder thing is if people are not doing that whole pause and ask for questions thing that I mentioned, then that means that you may need to just kind of jump in and interrupt. You're going to have to sort of be comfortable saying, hey, we need to go back a second, I got a question, and you know, sorry, there's a lag in the technology, right? Like that's always fine, but it is very awkward because interrupting people feels rude. But sometimes you're going to have to do it. When you do get the floor, that's a chance to sort of set a better example and do that whole calling on people thing that I talked about. Like if you are, interrupt, get your point, have a little back and forth, then call on other people, that sort of demonstrates like a better way to kind of run these things than someone talking and someone interrupts. And because it's rude, you have to be self-aware that you're not doing it too much. If you're interrupting the same person all the time, you might want to talk to them and say, hey, technology is terrible, I'm really not trying to interrupt you, but it seems like that, so like, what are we going to do? Like, this is hard. It's much better to have the meetings run better, so just be self-aware. Assuming good intentions, right? So people are going to interrupt you, and you have to assume that they're doing that for all the reasons stated, that they're not being a jerk. But also think that if you're chatting with people who are like in an office, so they're sitting around a conference table and you're a head on a screen, like they're not having a great time either, right? It's awkward for them too. And especially if this is their first experience with remote people, it's going to be very jarring for them. So have some empathy for, how things might be going for them. I mean, I know that I used to be the terrible headquarters person who forgot about the remote people. Like, so I remember what that was like. And so that kind of helps. And I mean, I've said it 100 times, the technology that backs this stuff is terrible. It barely works. I can't believe we have it at all. And this is kind of an evergreen topic to bond with everyone over, actually. Like, it's very easy to just complain about the video chat system as a way to bond with everybody, because they have the same terrible experience that you do. And it sort of can take a little edge off of everyone if things are kind of not going well. Help others help you. So, aforementioned AV problems. The hardest thing about them is that you're having the problem, they have the power to fix it, but they don't know what experience you're having, so they don't know what to do. So you got to channel your inner wedding coordinator and just tell them what you want them to do. And people are happy to do that, right? Point the camera at Pat, because Pat is speaking. No problem, right? You don't have to be a jerk about it, but just kind of be directive, because they just want to fix it, but they don't know what to do. Another way is to have an ally who is on site, who can help with these things, or a regular back channel. So at Stitch Fix, we do company all hands meetings. They are remote. There's hundreds of people dial into this thing. And the video chat system that we use has a text chat as well. And so one of the women that works in the headquarters on our office management team, her job during the all hands is to watch that text chat to see if there's problems, right? And you can say, oh, I can't hear this, or can you move the camera? And she can go figure it out without interrupting the meeting. You can also ask questions, and she will ask questions for you. It's really, really handy. early on at Stitch Fix, one of the developers who was on site was like the ambassador for all the remotes, and he decided he was going to make sure that the things he needed to do were happening, and so he would frequently go in and set up all this AV stuff in the Mac Mini camera crap that we had before, and like really helped. So that is hugely helpful. So, and how do you do that? Build trust. People that you trust that are on site, they can be your ally. Socializing, that's kind of a weird one, right? So think about like if you go to an office and you're the quietest person of all time, you're very private, you don't share anything about yourself at all. People still know things about you, right? They know what you look like, they know how tall you are, they know if you're having a good hair day, they know what kind of clothes you wear, they know when you come to work, they know when you go to the bathroom, they know when you eat lunch, they know the sound of your voice. And that, right, it humanizes you, and like it or not, it delivers some base level of trust that, oh, you're at least another actual human being that I have seen in real life. Like, okay, we got that going for us. When you're remote, you don't have any of that. You're just a producer of emails probably, right? So you have to, all the stuff that we talked about before is great, but you also need to humanize yourself to everyone. I mean, they intellectually know, yeah, this is a person and not a Perl script, but you need to, engage more with that stuff. And making small talk is a way to do that. I'm an introvert. I hate small talk for very actually good reasons, but it's the only way to have real talk is to have small talk, and it does help. So one thing that I find when I'm on video chats, if there's a lot of people and there's in a lot of offices, there's always a little bit of time between when the meeting is supposed to start and when the meeting actually starts. And you could stare at each other, you could check email, or you could chat about stupid, inane things and get to know the people that you're on this chat with. Right? An evergreen topic is the weather. It's so banal, but like for me, San Francisco, right? They don't have weather, and I have weather, so I can talk about it, and that's interesting sometimes to people. You're remote. You have a background. Like, what's going on, right? I sit outside sometimes, and there are cats in my neighborhood that come and sit with me, and they're in the background. So, hey, what's that cat doing there, right? So it's stupid, but it humanizes you, and it kind of gets things, kind of started. And then scheduling time to socialize is weird, but if you have one-on-ones with no particular agenda, like it's not a one-on-one with your boss, it's time to just sort of chit-chat. It feels really awkward and weird to schedule time to stand around the water cooler, but it does work, and it helps a lot. So being responsive and setting boundaries, to me, this is more about like traveling, right? Because when you're remote, there's usually some expectation that you will travel at some point to be with the other remote people, be with the people that you work with. Like at Stitch Fix, we do this every quarter. We try to get the entire engineering team together because that is super humanizing. It replenishes a lot of trust really easily, but travel is hard. So if you're getting into a remote situation, you need to know like what is the deal, what am I expected to, and you might not be told, you might need to ask. And I would also say that you should push yourself to travel. I mean, travel is, it's uncomfortable, but you should do it because it does help. There's a guy on my team scared to death of flying, hates being on planes. He's been in the company for like 2 years, has not gotten better. He still hates it. It drives him crazy, but he pushes himself to do it because he knows that there's a value to meeting everybody in person every once in a while. Assuming good intentions. So it's very easy to be upset when people are not considerate. Like for example, we did our engineering offsite that I mentioned, and they made name tags for everybody. Which is awesome because we're now so big that I don't know everybody's name. So the people who live in San Francisco, their name tag says, Pat Smith, San Francisco, California. My name tag says David Copeland, remote DC. Like, I don't live in remote DC. I live in Washington, DC. But you know what? It's cool. It's fine, right? Like, people don't know what it's like, so you kind of have to not like be upset when they do things that like seem inconsiderate, because they're really not. It's just like they don't know. Like, they've never worked remote, so they don't know like how annoying it might be to see that you live in remote and not your actual city, right? It's fine. So you have to just sort of like let that stuff go and try to improve as you can, but it really no one means anything by it. Now you're gonna miss happy hours. You just got to be okay with that. I like having a beer with my coworkers, but the respect and trust I have in them is not because we've shared beers, it's because we've done good work. And that's just how I choose to value my coworkers. Fortunately for me, Stitch Fix does not do business at happy hours. I know some companies, they do business at happy hours, and if your company is one of them and you're remote, That is tricky, and you're going to have to find some ways to sort of figure out what business got done. Personal opinion, that is not healthy, but I know it happens. Fortunately for us, it does not. And lastly, helping others help you. So along the lines of the people in the headquarters, right, who aren't remote, they're not going to know what the situation is like, and they're also not going to know like how to improve things. So suggesting ways to socialize is good. You know what would help you, so drive that conversation. That's another way to show agency and leadership. And if you can do it in a way that all your boss has to do is say yes, then cool. Bosses are happy to say yes to things if that's all they have to do. That makes it way easier for them. So be creative, think about some ways to do that. Like we've got a lot of developers that live in Dallas-Fort Worth area. They don't work on the same team, but we have a warehouse in Dallas. And the warehouse, of course, has offices in it. And so those developers, every once in a while, they'll go to the Dallas office and just kind of be next to each other because it's pretty easy and pretty low friction and pretty low cost. So yeah, that helps. Be creative about that stuff, and it's good. Okay, all of that and much more will help build trust. It is the key. Like when I think about every positive interaction I've had, it's because I have trust with that person, and every painful interaction is because I have not established that trust. And so, you have a mental index of where you are with everybody and how you need to act. You can get away with certain things with one person you can't with another because the trust isn't equalized and you're not kind of working on that. But I think about this, every day. So that is more or less it. Here's the mindsets again. Communicate frequently and clearly. Be responsive. Set boundaries. Assume good intentions. And help others help you. Think about how you can do these things. You'll find a million more things than what I just went over, but they really do work. So if what I described is a way that you would like to work, I can make that happen. Come talk to me. We're hiring, of course. If you want to get a hold of me, there I am on Twitter and all that. I also wrote a book called The Senior Software Engineer. If you're interested in other things about being a good developer that are not about code, the book has that stuff in there. And that's it. I have no idea if we have time for questions.
We do have time for questions.
Okay.
So, Eric.
Thank you.
One thing you didn't touch on is hiring remote. So hiring somebody to be remote that you're just interviewing, you don't know up front. How do you go about hiring?
Yeah, so the question is, how do you hire remote? We now are capable of hiring a person who we've never met in person, but it took a while to get there. So the general hiring process is, I think it's at a high level pretty typical of other companies. You do a phone screen. We do like a take-home project, and then if you get through those things, then there's the on-site interview, and so we'll just fly you out to San Francisco. But part of that is having a video chat with someone who is not in San Francisco. So that gives the true experience. But recently we've had a few people who weren't interested in doing that, and we were able to do that whole process remote and feel good about that because there's enough structure built that we're like, okay, I can now trust the process that we can have a person inserted into it that we've never met. But yeah.
Do you do a project?
Oh yeah, so it's like a application, and you add a couple features to it, and then you send it back, and we look at it, and then the second step is then you pair program with someone remotely usually and add another feature to it together. So that, and it's actually a really good simulation of how it works, right? Because you are going to go off and do a thing, and we're not going to see you doing that thing, and you're going to produce it back. Like that is how the work is. So it's a pretty good simulation of like what it's like to work with us.
Mark.
Do you find any value in possibly arranging teams longitudinally to try and avoid some time zone issues? Because even with all the techniques and practices and tools that we have, you still can waste an awful lot of time when your end of business day is 3 hours ahead of someone else's end of business day.
Right. So the question is, do we align teams around time zones, and kind of how do we deal with that? We did at first. So we're sort of organized around different parts of the business. So the team that does like the front end stuff, like the website and emails, like they are all we're all co-located in San Francisco. And then my team at the time, we were doing all the stuff for the warehouse. So we were all happened to be East Coast. So that helped. But yeah, it's like every time you hire, eventually like it's really hard to maintain that. And so now every time someone's hired on one of the teams that has a lot of remotes, it's like, okay, can we still have our stand-up at the same time? Because we would have it at like 11:30 a.m. Pacific, and then we'd hire someone on the West Coast. We're like, you do not need to get up at 8 a.m. to have a stand-up. unless you want to. And yeah, so but this is kind of part of dealing with it.
I can't see your name, but you try.
How did you handle sending out or coming to a common agreement on the SLAs? Did it come from leadership? Did it come from each individual director of that particular board to send out what they expect the remote engineers to be doing at such a time and the responses?
Yeah, so the question is about the SLAs and how explicitly that is set. It's not. It's my own personal thing. Like everyone kind of does it differently. So I guess the most explicit expectation is that you should respond to an email like within a business day. So it's kind of, but it's self-motivating to be more responsive than that. And so we try to cultivate that, but it's not super explicit.
Wayne.
How do you deal with distraction around you?
How do I deal with distraction around me? I get way less distracted at home because now I have an area at home that is set aside for work, and that helps. Having a clear list of things to do helps because, I'm just like I got to get all this stuff done. No time for TV and all that stuff. I know that not everybody is like that, so you kind of have to find a place to do that. Like one of the developers, he goes to a co-working space because he's more productive when he's like amidst people who are like also doing work. I go to a noisy coffee shop because it doesn't bother me and I don't get distracted. But yeah, you got to figure that out.
Scott?
I'm a recent remote developer, and one of my immediate frustrations was whiteboarding, and not being able to collaborate with employees who are whiteboarding when I'm on the screen, or contrarily, not being able to whiteboard and effectively communicate to them. Do you have something that, or suggestions on how to work around that, or maybe technology to emulate that?
Yeah, so the question is whiteboarding. How do you whiteboard? It's a technique we all use as programmers, and it is very hard to do remote. Like the classic is aim the laptop at the whiteboard and hope you can use thick enough lines that it can like make out. Yeah, that is very hard. So we tend to do more asynchronous, like here's a thing I would have done on a whiteboard, but I've made a document. I did do like a remote whiteboarding thing. I forget what the tool was called, but it was one of those like sort of group drawing things. And so we all agreed that we would go into that and whiteboard on that. And it worked pretty well. The thing we produce is unreadable and you could never do anything with it. But the act of watching people draw on it, like that was helpful. But yeah, you got to get everybody on it. If you're like the one person trying to look sideways at the whiteboard, like it is really hard. So another thing you can do too is have some, like just ask like, okay, what did you just write down on the whiteboard? Like, at least passively consume it. But it is tricky.
They have smart board tools that you can use for that. It's like a screen you can draw on.
Oh yeah. That's right. A previous company I had, it could print it out, but yeah, you can share the whiteboard remotely.
You can also share it in real time.
Yeah.
Share the screen with the other person you can write on it too.
Yeah, that's cool. All right.
I have something.
Yeah.
I have a little whiteboard and I draw on it sometimes.
Yeah.
I want to talk because I'm remote.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
the other way around too. Sometimes it's frustrating to think, good idea.
Yeah.
I'm definitely interested in producing kind of long explanation emails. Can you talk about the screencast a little bit more and the tools?
Yeah, it's a question about the screencasting and tools, how they work. So Jing is very easy. It just records. You just say, okay, go, and it starts recording whatever's happening on your screen. So what I would do is, neaten up my desktop, maximize, and also records your mic. So I would, talk through what I'm doing, and it takes a little while to get good at it. Like if you went to my secret file in Jing, there would be tons of bad language as I messed it up a lot. But you kind of you get practice and you do it. Yeah, I tried fancier things, and they are a lot more work in there. Like ScreenFlow is a popular one with screencasters, and it requires a lot more commitment to like figure out how to do it. So I don't know. Jing worked pretty well, and it's a good starter, I guess.
All right, last question.
Hi. We have two sites on our company. It's normal to have like 5 people on one side, 5 people on the other one. And video conference in that case, it's painful because sometimes you don't know the person, so you don't know who's talking. There's like one camera, the person is small, you can recognize. Do you have any tips for that?
Yeah, so it's how to deal with the bunch of people standing around a camera and half of them are off screen kind of problem. So one thing that I do, because I'm sort of comfortable like asking is like, hey, can you get on the camera while you're introducing yourself? Sometimes that works effectively. More long term, at my previous job, we had a lot of remotes, and what people would do is even if they're in the office, they just dial in on their laptop at their desk, and so no one is standing around a conference room thing. That can help too, and plus it gives everybody the same experience, which is empathetic. So.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
And